Okay, I think we'll get started. Um, just want to say thank you to everyone for coming to our third annual Coming Home to Psychology event. And for anyone who is not regularly in the Kenny building or not anymore, we're really happy to have you here. And for those of us who are, welcome to you also. Before we start with anything, I'd like to acknowledge that we are currently on the unceded ancestral territory of the Musqueam. We thank the Musqueam Nation for its hospitality. This has always been a place of learning, and so I'm really happy that we get to continue that tradition in what we do today. I'd also like to acknowledge that the BC Lower Mainland is home to peoples. A couple housekeeping items before I introduce our lovely speaker. We are recording the talk and we'll share the recording afterward. After the talk, hopefully Catherine will be willing to take questions, and please raise your hand and Catherine or I will call on you, see how it goes. From 3 to 5 p.m., hopefully you're all planning to join for the party part of the day, which will include a research area showcase, including student club tables and really great food. And if you haven't purchased a food ticket, you can still do so at the Graduate Student Council GSC table. Okay, our EDI committee will have a table with more information on the PI Fund, which many of you might know about, but maybe not everyone. So the PI Fund is the Psychology Inclusive Excellence Fund that we started a few years back to help support students who have financial need and or bring additional diversity to our campus. And we gave out our first awards both to graduate students and undergrads in the last few months and few weeks. So we're happy to sort of really launch this program and to hopefully keep it going in perpetuity. So in the name of raising money for this fund, if you love my t-shirt, which you should, there is the opportunity to donate to the fund and get a t-shirt. So you get a t-shirt with a $50 donation. So downstairs there'll be a table, there's a QR code, and if you're able to give, that would be really amazing, and the money will go directly to supporting students in need. And finally, last but not least, certainly, I am excited to introduce Dr. Catherine Rawn today. She's a psychology alumnus who earned her PhD from UBC in 2009 and then became a faculty member in our learning enhancement area. Those of you who've been around, been through classes with Catherine, know what a gift she is to our department. And today she's going to tell us about her research and insights into psychology's grading policy, dun, 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 and its impact on teaching and learning. In addition to being a professor of teaching, she's also the associate head of undergraduate affairs in psychology. She serves as chair of our curriculum committee as well as the arts curriculum committee, which is undoubtedly a massive job. Her research interests include educational leadership, scholarship of teaching and learning, collaborative learning methods, technology-enhanced teaching and learning, student evaluations of teaching, and social psychology broadly. Catherine was a social psychology student here under Darren Lehman. Most relevant, that is most relevant to the purpose of today's talk, because this is intended to be an alumni event for sort of current and future alumni. We are just really happy that we have a true alumni of our program speaking to something that's so important to current and presumably past, although there's not much they can do about it, students, our grading policy. So thanks so much, Catherine.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here today. And so to extend my land, our acknowledgement of the land that we're on, I want to provide a little bit additional sense of gratitude here from myself as well. I'm grateful to the Musqueam people, and as Katie mentioned, whose traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory sits UBC Vancouver. I've added a couple of photos here. One of a path I walk every day down the center of campus that used to be a parking lot way back in the day. I've been here since 2003. And so back then that was a parking lot. And so now it hosts the post that tells the story of the origin of the Musqueam name. And then this is the view from my office window at its best time of year, which is springtime. I wanted to bring us into thinking about it in a similar way to I bring our my research methods students, some of whom I have alumni here from my class in this room. And so some of the things I want us to think about and start connecting is our understanding of psychology folks that environment, history, and culture matters. We know it does for psychological processes and ways of knowing. So as we acknowledge the land, we can hold that in mind. I also feel like, we're here at a place of higher education. And I think it's important to acknowledge that Indigenous people, including the Musqueam, were literally, deliberately, legally excluded from participation in higher education at the beginning. And I want to acknowledge the tremendous resilience of Indigenous people who are here, which is amazing. If you haven't checked out the Hidden History of UBC Centennial, it's a very rich website. I also want to tie us in here to acknowledging that psychology is a colonial discipline. It's got its roots in Germany and England and New England in the United States. And so kind of working within that space as well. So what do we do about that, and how do we think about that? And so I want to offer and pose that we've got, I think, kind of much to unlearn and learn as in our space here as a discipline and as educators and students and alumni in this space. I also want to acknowledge that I'm a settler twice over. I'm here in Vancouver, but I grew up in Southern Ontario. And I grew up in Southern Ontario, as I've been learning over the last few years, on stolen lands. And so this is one image of my family farm that from 1848 to 2020 was the Rawn homestead on my dad's side on traditional Saugeen Ojibwe territory north of Mount Forest, Ontario. Now they've learned and done some relearning and unlearning. I've connected that time frame to deliberate contravention of the treaties of the time. And I mostly grew up in Guelph on the ancestral homeland of the Anishinaabe peoples on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. So as we can come together to really talk about and think about issues in higher education, how we grade, how we assign numbers to what we're doing, I invite you to think about how who you are and where you've come from kind of brings and influences your approach to that topic. Okay? So what I'm getting at here, where I'm leading into, is one of the key concepts that through this research that I'm going to be sharing with you today, I've really begun to appreciate on a very deep level. And that's a concept called positionality. And positionality has not really been part of something that we really think about a lot in psychology, although that's growing. And so I offer a couple of definitions, kind of identifying the social roles and lived experiences that shape the perspective you uniquely bring to any act of learning, teaching, or research, kind of where we're coming from with respect to the topic and to the other people involved in the research process, and some examples are there. So by way of that, and kind of in the spirit of homecoming and acknowledging alumni, I want to offer you a little bit more about my story because that might be, interesting and topical of this time. And also, I hope will help to kind of paint a picture of kind of who I am as I come into this research and on our grading policy. So I do that in pictures. So I offer you a few photos here. There's me and my friend at the time. Well, and still, it's not. We didn't have a falling out or anything. Lisa Leonardatos. We were undergraduates. That's our research assistant lab. We went to University of Waterloo, but St. Jerome's University within the University of Waterloo. I was there from 1999, last century, until 2003. Those floppy disks, those are floppy disks. If you don't know, it took that many of them to hold my thesis and its analysis, my honors thesis. So yeah, right. I wanted to point out there also that at the time, what was the norm in that department was every research assistant, to my knowledge, was paid. And without that reality, I would not be here today. I would not have been able to afford to volunteer my time to get the research experience that I needed, to get the advising that I needed, the faculty to say, hey, go to grad school, you should do this. Think about that. So I offer that as kind of part of my story that's relevant here. I met my husband there in that little office. We just celebrated our 20th anniversary. Blows my mind. So we very promptly moved out here to Vancouver, and so I was here in Vancouver from 2000. Well, still am, but was in grad school. I got my MA and my PhD here from 2003 to 2009. That's where I first encountered our grading policy. So I spent 6 years working, 5 years working as a TA, and then that 6th year, I was already teaching and implementing this policy. And these are some of my fellow alumni, Leslie Duncan, Yelena Berchich, Will Gervais, still some of my best friends. And we travel together too. So in addition to some advising from Darren Lehman, I also need to acknowledge Kathleen Voss, who was at Minnesota. She was here for 1 year in the business school when I first started, and then continued to advising. I learned very much from her, even though she was in Minnesota at the time. I started teaching research methods, like 217 quantitative research methods, in 2008. I've taught that course about 25 times at this point. So this a quantitative framework is something that I've been working with for well over 20 years, actually 25 at this point. I was hired first in 2009, right out of graduate school, and I became an associate head for undergraduate affairs, as Kelly mentioned, in 2020 or in 2021. Last bit I want to share is I have 4 siblings in my family of origin. I was the first one of us to go to higher education since my youngest sister, Victoria. She also went to undergrad, and my other 2, Philip and Carolyn, didn't. They are on different journeys. I'm the only person in my family first person in my family to go to undergrad, and then still the only person to have gone to grad school. That's my sister, delighting in seeing Dr. C. Rawn. She also is a C. Rawn. Got a kick out of that. In time, bringing us kind of closer up in time to really where this influences on this work. I have to acknowledge my gran, who raised one of my sisters and myself, who died early last year. And that is going to come back as part of my story and how I've learned and unlearned in this research process. And then I also want to acknowledge the Saddle research community, Scholarship of Teaching and Learning research community, of whom I feel like I've been on the sidelines of and kind of observing in for a long time, dabbling in a little bit. And here we are, including Dr. Webb back there, who in PEI, on PEI, when we were at a conference a couple of summers ago. But that research community I've learned so much from, including the qualitative framework, the qualitative methodologies that I've used in this research. So it's a bit of an extended background, but I really wanted to give you a sense of kind of how my story kind of comes to influence the approach that I've taken to understanding this policy. I've intersected with it in a lot of different ways, and higher education more broadly. So this brings me to our getting closer to our major research question here. So the next parts of my talk are a bit more of the closer to more of a traditional research talk style, with some tweaks. I'm going to offer a bit of background. I'll weave in some literature as we go, and then end today with some applications and implications of this work. So this is about the policy. So just so we're all on the same page, I've got a very wordy slide here with some highlights. This was our syllabus policy as of a year ago. So I've got some bolded. I know this is a lot to see. So basically, our key ideas to point out here are the point is to reduce grade inflation and increase equity or maintain equity across multiple course sections. Is the underlying intention of this policy, which I want to point out are very reasonable goals. I think many of us may be able to agree on, but maybe not. The average grade for 100 and 200 level classes, 72 for an exceptionally strong, 70 for average, 68 for weak class. Corresponding figures for 300 level classes are there, and then 400 and selective entry classes, and then some language about scaling may be used to comply with these norms. So this is a policy that is the focus of this research. I've got a little bit of additional information. There is, in addition to that, part that's meant to be in our syllabi. There's an end of term grade approval process. So as course instructors, we're expected to fill out a form, and that form has some information about expected proportions of A's and B's, and fails, and they follow the shape of the normal distribution. It was initially implemented in 2001 in response to an external review of the department. And there have been some periodic kind of adjustments and discussions along the way since then. In 2020, all averages were +5, where a 5% was added to each of those numbers that you just saw. So those include that +5%. And then we added the extra detail about exemption about the 400 level and select entry courses in 2021. So a few adjustments along the way. Now, whenever I've talked about this in various ways and with various audiences now, and every time folks want to talk about it. So, so this is where our sticky notes come in. So I invite you to grab your sticky notes. So now my first question to you is a private response, just so I can get the, oh, great. Oh yeah, yeah. So private response. So choose a color, and then I'm gonna ask you to hold up one of your sticky notes just here in front of you. Maybe, may not, I don't think we need them, yeah. So privately holding up one of your sticky notes. We don't need pens. Don't worry about pens. Yeah, we need sticky notes. You may want to choose to use a pen, but you don't need to. Okay. All right, let's come back. So your immediate reactions to our grading policy, just to get, so you know, this is private, just between you and me, and no one else look around. Just hold it up here. Kind of, are you feeling more on the positive side? Choose the green one. More kind of basically anything else, or more on the negative side, the pink one. Okay, so real quick, holding it up here. Okay, all right, just getting a temperature check. Okay, all right, great. Not squealing at anyone, not trying to tell anyone. Okay, great. All right, beautiful, beautiful mix. Okay, Now, next up, have a chat. Chat with your neighbors. If you can just kind of, talk about whatever you want to talk about with this, with respect to this policy, but you might answer this question. So how do you think this policy might impact your teaching and or learning? So that could be a prompt question, or if you just want to kind of get out your thoughts about it, now's your chance. If you prefer a quiet, on your own method, you can write on these sticky notes if you like. Okay, ready? Go.
I just take a picture of the log and read the first policy.
We can go back to after, at the end. Yeah. If you can stick around for a couple minutes after, sure. Yeah.
What's the policy
The policy that. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Great. Thanks. All right, I'm gonna start pulling you back. I know we could talk about this for an hour. I could unleash you and you could go on. It's a very exciting topic. All right. Okay. Thank you. Welcome back. Okay. Do we feel better? Okay. All right. Good. Yes and no. Passionate. That's good. Good. Okay. All right. Well, you can, if you do choose to, I'm happy to take any feedback or ideas that you want to share with me on those Post-it notes at the end, if you like. But that's our Post-it note segment. Okay. Moving on. So a couple things, a little bit of a framework that one of the ways that has helped me think about kind of going this policy and how to start understanding it in a researchy way. Sure, I'll go with that. So one thing that we can think about is our classrooms as influenced by and nested within various different levels of different systems. Right? So one layer here is department, and there's a research literature that really studies these systems and impact on classrooms. And so in this literature, they talk about our classrooms being kind of the micro level of teaching, and so a lot of teaching and learning research is about kind of what are the classroom interventions that kind of help enhance teaching and learning. This research literature then nests that micro level in the department, our meso level. But of course, we operate at a macro level. We operate within the institution of UBC. We could even like poke the Faculty of Arts in between there. And of course, we have our national and disciplinary contexts, which also impact what happens in our classrooms. So things like at the national level, we've got the Canadian norm of an A- starting at an 80. That's not true in some other countries, including the US, right? In our disciplinary norms, we have, our second year stats and research methods sequence. That is in almost every single psychology major in North America anyway. Okay? It just is. It's how our discipline does it. So those impacts what happens in our classrooms. This research focuses and shows time and time again that kind of conversations happen at these other levels are great, but a major impact on our teaching and learning is this meso level, department culture. And so this framework has helped me think about our policy as something that may be driving or a contribution to our department's teaching culture. So, but of course, this is not the only level to think about this. So I want to set the stage for kind of why this work has happened now in the last few years. And to do that, we're going to zoom out a little bit and then zoom back in. So right before this work started was, a minor world event. The pandemic, right? We're rethinking, relearning pretty much everything and our assumptions about what's happening in the classroom being one set. We had that year Black Lives Matter taking center stage. We had off the heels of that our UBC, so kind of coming down a level, our UBC Indigenous Strategic Plan came out. We had our department now at the meso level, our department's EDI strategic plan came out in 2021. I also became associate head for undergraduate affairs that year. We were still kind of in that mostly online space that year, right? So with that as the immediate background, fast forward a few months, and we had a colloquium in spring 2022 by Dr. Vijay Sathi, who had just come out with Inclusive Teaching with her co-author, Kelly Hogan, and shared this fantastic talk on inclusive teaching strategies. And then at the end, our grading policy came up, as it does. And if you were there, you might remember the shockwave that was sent through the chat in Zoom, because it was an online colloquium, when BG said something to the effect of, truly supporting learning for all students is not achievable using a norm referenced grading practices, which are rooted in a history of eugenics. You remember, Kylie, you were part of that, right? We had undergraduate students, we had faculty, we had TAs who were all in that Zoom chat, and I just went. And so with that fire and my relatively recent kind of new position as associate head for undergraduate affairs, that really lit an extra fire in me to really take this on as a project. So I think it's no accident that all of these events kind of contributed or kind of laid a foundation for this work. So some of the questions I was kind of playing with at that point were how do individual human beings enact and engage with this policy? So we had some, looking at distributions, we had some analyses done in the past. And so I really wanted to think about our humans, the humans' engagement with the policy. I was thinking about kind of, unintentional side effects of this policy 20 plus years out at that point of its initial initiation. And then this question kind of just kept coming back to me. Is there a way to create space in our department culture of teaching for every student, at least in theory, to have the chance to succeed? Okay. So how can we signal to students we believe in them, they belong here, while maintaining high standards and a focus on fairness and that idea of fairness across sections, and supporting instructors to support students. So in that work, in that kind of mental space, I then applied for it. I'm grateful to have received a SOTL Seed Fund. So this is from the Institute for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning here at UBC, run as a connected to but distinct from CTLT. This seed fund, we have two of our alumni, PhD alums, Trish and Natasha, who work to steer this program along with Adriana. They were the ones who funded our SOTL specialist, Martine Dammert, who was absolutely instrumental in teaching me so much about qualitative work and in steering this project. This also brought in Jean Wu, who's here. Welcome, who is a work-learned student, research assistant, and then directed study student also working on this project. So extreme gratitude to this team of folks for this work. So this was the guiding research question. How do people in our community perceive our department's grading policy and its impact on teaching and learning practices? So right away, this research question was pretty clear, was not going to be answerable using my 20 years of toolkit, which I had to kind of set aside and learn some qualitative methods. So I've signaled, I'm using this this symbol throughout to signal kind of some of my lessons, my spotlight lesson time. So got some, BREV approval, Behavioral Research Ethics Board approval for this method. Took it what I later learned was called a sequential mixed methods approach. Didn't know that at the time, but I did that anyway. I did through these. A survey. So I sent out a big survey. Mainly, the point of the survey was really to recruit for the qualitative data collection. But in the meantime, I couldn't help myself. Added some quantitative questions just to get a sense. Sent that out to all instructors, TAs, and majors, psychology majors. And from there, we recruited for the qualitative components. We conducted interviews with instructors, focus groups with TAs and majors was the plan, and they were completely conducted by Martine. So at this point, I was firewalled here by even seeing who had signed up and said that they were interested in participating in the qualitative part. Did some survey analyses and took a qualitative approach, made some decisions, and talk more about that later if you're interested. I'm going to leave the quantitative data aside for now. And then dove into learning this very lengthy and intensive process of qualitative analysis. I took a method by Rawn and Clark called Reflexive Thematic Analysis. I've since learned to think about it a little bit differently, but basically it includes 6 phases of engaging with the transcripts that emerge here. And there was probably 150 pages, would you say, Jeannie, of transcripts that emerge from this process. And this analysis takes 6 phases, including the writing phase. It's considered another layer of analysis, which I'm still working on, and is part of this process that's kind of broken my brain a little bit to think about that as still writing or as still analysis. Martine and Jeannie, integral here. And one of the things in working together with Martine and Jeannie through our analyses is to embrace our differences in interpretation and incorporate them and acknowledge them and not treat them as biases that need to be minimized, but instead lenses to appreciate and integrate, which again turns some of my assumptions about how we do research kind of on its head there. So a little bit of sample information here for those of you who are just yearning for some numbers in your life. I know some of you are. I've got survey responses and qualitative folks. A couple of things to point out here. I've got the population sizes here from that year of data collection. These are survey responses. Did have a mix of full-time and sessional faculty who responded. And then of the qualitative, we weren't able to recruit any, to book any graduate students. So we don't have any graduate student TAs for our focus groups that we've got. We were able to have 2 focus groups inclusive of 7 undergraduate psychology majors and 11 course instructors, which was of 13 people who expressed interest. We were able to pin down and book 11. So this is another lesson. The intent is not to generalize. So the first question, that's my instinct, and maybe many of yours, is to think about any sample, not representative, right? Set those aside, leave them out the door. This is a qualitative space for the next little while. Let them aside. So the intent here is not to generalize, but to appreciate and then learn from individuals' perspectives. That's all the numbers I have for you today. If you want to leave, I understand. Okay. These took the form of semi-structured interviews, about 10 questions. Here's an example. How would you describe the effects or implications of this grading policy on your teaching? So pretty straightforward kinds of questions. They were conducted last May by Martine, copy edited and anonymized the Zoom transcriptions so that I wasn't able to tell who, nor was I interested in trying to figure out who said what. So I do not know. All I know about our sample is that there was a mix of ranks. There was a mix of ranks in our interviews, but that's as far as I know. All right. Okay. One further metaphor that is used in qualitative work that I found really helpful, again, for kind of getting ready for the type of data that I'm about to show you, is captured by this image of crystals, growing crystals. And so this metaphor that's used, we're used to kind of triangulating, right? Triangulating findings. Instead of triangulating, where everything comes together and points in the same direction, there's an embracing of diverse perspectives here, embracing of complexity. So the purpose here is to not find the truth, but embrace that there are many truths and try to make sense of that collection of truths that is complex. It's a snapshot in time by these particular people with no intent to make a generalization, but still learn from the perspectives of the folks who have offered their take on things. Very different than what we're used to. All right. So from this work, we have 6 themes. I've organized them in a way of circles that kind of get kind of farther out from the details of the policy, let's say. So first 2, capturing by policy content, change and enforcement, and then specific classroom implementation strategies. So I'm going to share with you some snippets from each, including some examples of quotes. And quotes are our evidence. So we're used to looking at numbers, no more numbers. So here, where we find validity is through directly quoting our participants. So when asked, to tell us about the policy, folks were, from instructors, different people put different emphasis on different parts. So some folks said, I don't know, I don't remember. We get emails once a term and I look it up then. Some folks zoomed right into the means and the standard deviations and they knew them all by heart. Changes in the policy were remembered differently by different people, changes over time. Some folks focused on departmental checks, that end of the term thing, and or being asked to scale grades, that experience of being asked to scale grades. So one example from an instructor that shows us kind of differences in the changes of the policy is this. And the grading distribution shifted upward during COVID in a compassionate fashion and has since shifted back down to its normal, what it's been for many years, which is kind of interesting because it actually didn't shift back. So we've got differences in memory of where the policy is. Students, there wasn't a lot of detail that was provided, and kind of folks differed in whether they read the policy or not, or relying on word of mouth. So for example, I think I heard about like 72 to 78. I think I heard that from one of my profs, but the rest is mainly word of mouth from other students. So I'm sure the information I have is not really reliable. Okay, so kind of a sense of a little bit more kind of separated from the policy content. Classroom implementation strategies came up a lot, and a lot around assessments. So instructors talked about how the policy, they perceive the policy to influence how long their tests are, what their content is, how difficult it is, how difficult they pitch the course, whether they use multiple choice, whether they never use multiple choice, whether they assign papers, whether they don't assign papers. Kind of this policy is kind of recruited as a reason for lots of different choices. Two different strategies were also brought up in terms of whether folks try to adjust the difficulty of assessments as the term goes. So if kind of grades end up higher at the beginning, then they try to make things harder later on to kind of balance out so that you don't end up having to scale. Whereas other folks reported kind of not doing that and just relying on scaling the final grades. And what I want to highlight is a recognition by a few people that it's challenging to figure out how to do this and to hit the mean. So one instructor said, over the years, I've learned to write better exams that I think are fair and do not include inherently unreasonable questions to meet the required grade distribution. But it's taken me like a decade to figure out how to do that. From students, in response to the different strategies, some students talked about finding it difficult to kind of adjust expectations as they went and with different instructors, and that they heard that different instructors connect their difficulty of the course to the policy. So to the first point, one student said, it adds an element of unpredictability in my grades and makes it hard to manage my time when I'm studying for finals, because scaling doesn't happen until the end. So we could have kind of ended there, right? Like we've got, how does the policy impact teaching and learning? Well, we've got some discussion of what the policy is and these direct classroom implications. Kind of these are the decisions that I make or don't make in my classroom because of this policy. But our participants made much, much more meaning out of these questions than this. So the next theme I'll offer brought us a little bit farther out to gaze at the policy. So thinking about questions about the purposes of grades, questions about the purposes of the policy came out. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So instructors, some of them mentioned, what the first sentence of the policy. So this serves as a way to coordinate courses and to prevent grade inflation. Instructors kind of came out on two different ways of that the policy promotes an emphasis on differentiating students from each other, and there were different feelings about how well that works or whether that's a good thing, and then a tension with differentiating students versus supporting learning and supporting and measuring learning. Some instructors noted that it helps to have high standards and kind of bring in high standards into our courses. It helps with calibrating new instructors kind of who come in from different places with different experiences, and then preventing easy A courses or easy A instructors, to which not every student has equal access to. So a couple of examples. I understand from an instructor, I understand the argument that if I can't give everyone 100%, let's say, right? But what if everybody did learn everything to 100%? That doesn't seem right. So this is this tension about kind of goes back to a different approach to grading that is not comparative. Another instructor wrote, I do feel like an A in UBC psychology is very meaningful. A's are not just doled out. So I guess that's what I mean in that it keeps the standard of performance meaningful and high. So obviously there's negative trade-offs for that, but I guess that's one positive. Students talked about in this theme mixed messages and a desire for more course coordination beyond just grades. So one student said, why is it exactly they do it? I think the three of us here have different reasons. So I think there might be some misinformation or lost information. What frustrates me about it is that instead of focusing on making sure profs have similar standards of evaluation across students, for their students, across different instructors and different courses, instead, so it's almost like it would be too challenging, they're taking it out on students by adjusting grades up and down. And then the student connected that to graduate school application. So on that note of kind of course coordinating and kind of other strategies, I'll bring in a little bit of literature here that course coordination can include common textbooks, assignments, instructional methods. Very rarely in the literature does it involve grade distributions, a little bit, but very rarely. In a very large survey of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math courses in the US, noted that it was more typical to align textbooks and content compared to exams, and grade distributions didn't even register on there. There's a tension as well with course coordination with instructor autonomy. So we have academic freedom and autonomy to kind of run our classes the way we want to run them and think is right and good. Yet, when we coordinate, there are other benefits, right? So to the extent that coordinating feels freely chosen by the instructors and where everybody on the team gets a say in it, those are good things, and course coordinating can work really well there. But when folks feel like other people have made these decisions about my course and I have to then do those things, that starts to have deteriorating effects. And also freeloaders who don't participate in the workload. Guess what? That's not just in classes or student projects. There are freeloaders. There's also that issue. Okay, so we've got three themes. These are the juicy ones. Okay, so get ready. We're going to get increasing amounts of juiciness here. So I'm going to have a sip of water here. Okay. So moving broader still, some folks were making even more meaning here by connecting this one policy in one department to a broader context outside the department. Here we have grade inflation is not about one department at one university in one discipline. This is a big, big thing. And so some folks are kind of struggling with that. The transcript came up a lot. So for example, I really have seen how it hurts our students when they're applying to a graduate school elsewhere because their grades look low. Side by side with students from other schools that don't have this kind of anti-grade inflation policy, our students do suffer as a result of that, I have no doubt. But I mean, for me and others who know this system, it's a very meaningful marker. But there's a tension there as soon as we go out and look at what our grades look like outside the department. From students also raised transcripts and graduate school applications a lot. In addition, this one perspective really grabbed my attention. And it's unique to this one student. UBC is known for being a good school for psychology, so it's kind of shocking that we would have this in place. Hopefully the average would be higher because people are learning more and getting more opportunities in this field. So noticed it almost felt like a disconnect to have this kind of policy, which I thought was a really interesting perspective to add. So a little bit of broader context here. It's really hard to find examples of other schools that have similar policies. You get word of mouth that they exist, but very few are actually written out and put in syllabi like ours is. So Jeannie's tried to find that. She searched all over and found very, very few examples of policy. So it's hard to just look out and see like how are other departments solving this. Grade inflation documented over 75 years. There's a paper that just came out this year that showed this. This is not about us. Grade inflation is a bigger issue, and there are different perspectives on whether this is a problem and how big of a problem it is. I'll offer one interesting case here that'll segue us into the next theme, which is a case of Wellesley College in the U.S. in Massachusetts. They had an institution-wide grading policy implemented in 2004. So kind of interesting, around the same time as when this policy was first put in. So interesting to think about conversations there, and was actually canceled in 2019. There was an analysis published in 2014, a quantitative analysis, and they noted that it did indeed successfully decrease the averages for departments that had really high averages. So it brought them down in line with others. And so there was more equity that way in aggregate across the campus. So there wasn't one discipline that kind of had a higher averages than others, and they tended to be humanities. However, instead of having fewer people get lower grades, the trend was that more people get lower grades, fewer people got higher grades. And so in an American context, this meant fewer people getting A's. It kind of shrunk, brought people down to not A's, but it wasn't evenly distributed. This effect was shown most strongly for Black and Latinx students, which raises other questions about this policy operating as without supports and instruction about how do we do this fairly and equitably, and how are people interpreting this policy? How does it play out with the real humans involved? And so this work didn't have any qualitative component, but it certainly raises some equity related questions, kind of bringing us right back to the earlier in my talk. So probably, I'm guessing, they didn't officially say this, but in response to that 2014 analysis, in 2019, they canceled that policy. So to segue us next, our last two themes are juiciest, and perhaps for some a bit unsettling. They have been for me, they probably have been for Jean as well. Ethics and inclusions concerns, and then impacts on relationships and authenticity. So some ethics and inclusions concerns that have been raised by the instructors in my study. I'll start with the quotes and then kind of pull it together. So one person said, you really, 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 again, you kind of secretly hope that there's going to be students who are like just not going to show up. There's students who are not showing up or not doing tremendously well. And rather than investing resources into helping them, it's almost like you're incentivized into explicitly letting them fail. And that just seems, frankly, revolting, morally speaking to me. Another instructor said, but what we need to recognize is that these policies disadvantage students who are already disadvantaged. First generation students who I assume are more likely to be minoritized in terms of their background, whether that's on the basis of race or sexuality or gender expression. Individuals who are minoritized have multiple strains when they come into the system, and they're fighting against these streams. These scaling policies that are designed to keep the low completely counter the broader EDI and anti-racist goals of our department at this point in time. So instructors lamented and really shared a struggle and deep concerns with letting struggling students continue to struggle as not an intentional part of this policy by any means, but one of the consequences. A sense of breeding competition for a finite pool of grades, linking the struggle to systemic barriers, as noted here. And I want to point out this sense of tension in phrasing here. Nobody was happy about this. Right? Everybody who went to this link, which wasn't everybody, but everyone who saw this link and went down this path had this kind of apprehension and tension in her phrasing. Another way that equity and inclusion concerns played out from the instructor side came out in job security and inequity and power dynamics among instructors. So I offered two quotes to kind of offer different the kind of different lenses on that. So one person said, know that there are a handful of faculty members in our department who don't adhere to the scaling policy. Faculty members who have positions where they have a lot of security. And by the use of they, I think it's kind of an othering word, so probably this person doesn't. They have tenure and they don't have to worry. They've got a decent amount of power and don't adhere to the scaling. And so what's one of the things that can be really frustrating is to know that some classes are using it and other aren't using it and other classes are. The flip side, sort of that is, well, I've heard that there are a few other faculty who refuse to adhere to the grading distribution and there's no consequence for that. Because you know, what discipline are you going to invoke on a faculty member who's refusing to enact a policy they think is problematic, corrupted, and inequitable? So I've heard this repeatedly over the years, and I'm now starting to wonder if I can become one of these faculty members because it's so unethical. But from this phrasing, you get the sense that this person has more job security probably than this person, and yet they're observing the same thing. And so, yeah, so this is another way that ethics and inclusion concerns played out among instructors. From students, raised a couple of different additional lenses that I'll add here. So kind of sort of echoing the earlier comments from instructors too. This was seen as a barrier to inclusion in the scholarly community. For example, I think a lot of us are really worried about grad school, especially when some of us have had additional barriers already to grad school, or where the psychology professors say that there's a bit of gatekeeping, that sort of happens. And then this would just be another barrier. And then another perspective that was raised by one of the students as well, linked back to the assessment practices. And so a student writes or spoke, when looking at students with neurodivergent students with different abilities, when having assessment methods that only favor one type of students, makes it a lot more challenging for diverse students. And then they were linking that with those decisions that the instructors make because of the grading policy. So that was another lens to look at the impact and connection here. Last thing. Impacts on relationships and sense of authenticity, who we bring to that classroom. From instructor's perspective, on the good side, the grading policy is seen sometimes as empowering high standards. So one person said, you know, it helps with faculty members who are new and untenured, who are a little bit more vulnerable to the pressures of students, to be able to say, look, I just can't raise everybody's grades. There's this policy that ties my hands, and it sort of protects them in the face of some of that pressure, which I remember being quite real. And then more than one person mentioned, you know, not feeling able to support students as much as they desire. So here's one example of that. And this was kind of in the context of a longer quote that is has this sense of tension around it. Because I don't want them to learn more. Because if they learn more, I'm going to have to scale them down. And so I don't implement a lot of things that I think would actually improve learning because of that, because I have to hit a meet, and I'm already always at the top of it. Right? There's not easy answers here. This is tough. Along this theme, some students brought up things like inhibiting working with other students. So for example, the student said, I think it hinders my learning because I think it would really help to study with other people and to help each other in the class, but I'm not incentivized to do so. I'm incentivized to do the opposite because of the grading policy. So I think that's a big obstacle, that I'm essentially isolated in my learning process. And then this is a bit of a longer quote here, but also adds another perspective that we hadn't seen before. So I offer this because it connects kind of with this challenge of instructor autonomy that I mentioned earlier. So in a way, it's like a catch-22. So if there was no scaling and UBC instead made courses more standardized across instructors, like making them have the same midterms, that'd be kind of limiting the professor's agency or autonomy to own their own classes. But it's not that different from how it is now, because profs who disagree with the course or disagree with the scaling policy aren't allowed to give the grades that they want to give and that they think the students deserve. So I think that's also troubling. And then this person adds that they personally would prefer the courses to be more standardized rather than making profs unable to give the grades they think the students deserve. There's a lot. A lot. There's a lot more. Let me tell you that. A lot. Qualitative work is a lot. This is our collective best effort at kind of capturing and grouping this meaning making. So a few kind of zooming out to some broad things to keep in mind. Remembering there's no intent to generalize here, right? This is recognizing that these are a few people's perspectives, quite varied perspectives and rich perspectives, and we're not trying to generalize here. Of course, thousands of students and dozens of instructors engage with this policy every year. In that context, these results do show a rich, diverse, and complex, complicated ways that this policy is perceived to impact teaching and learning practices. Some things are good. There's some alignment with the original intent, at least in terms of perception, right? And some perspectives are showing support. And then there are also some pretty serious unintended side effects that are in some cases misaligned with our strategic plan, our EDI strategic plan. I think the values that that go along with that. So I want to share a little snapshot of the so what, the implications, applications, what we've done, what I've done, what we've done with this work. So 3 things, little snapshots of each. One, in trying to, write the paper about thinking about kind of what contribution could learning about this make. And so one way that I've come to understand it is by thinking about what guidance can we use and could I give to other departments trying to figure out this kind of policy. So I've developed a model of grading policy development, might be relevant in other contexts, but particularly to grading policy, that kind of brings us to different levels of analysis. So thinking about that policy document as just one step, but in conversation with having a transparent purpose and supports for instructors, classroom implementation guidelines, teaching supports, and mechanisms to revisit these things regularly. Looking at issues of ethics, inclusion, relationships, and authenticity, and reviewing these first 2 layers with that in mind. And then even more broadly, of course, the institutional and development, disciplinary norms and practices. So I've put these together, based on these themes. So this is another way of organizing these themes to kind of think about what lessons, what can we learn from this going forward. As I've been working on that, I want to nod to our working group and where we are with this policy this year. So shout out to all these people, some of whom are in the room right now, who worked with me from January to April of 2024. We met bi-weekly. And we were puzzling our way through and debating, and sometimes it got pretty heated, Francis and Jeannie, right? Like this was some rich discussion that we had to figure out what we wanted to recommend. So we had the basis of this analysis, this work, and then we wanted to figure out what we recommended. Given the strengths and where we were, we together did not ultimately recommend abolishing the policy. Instead, it's a very long document, 20 plus pages, actually. But ended up with a proposal too. I can show you if you're interested in the all the words, but it's a 40 slide. But basically, we voted in support of proposal 2 in the summer, which included some minor shifts in the means, so some minor shifts. More transparency and guidance and positive framing, more data collection and monitoring, a pathway for instructors to be able to, that's explicit and has a good process to appeal a grading grades if they feel like they should be exempted, if their students should be exempted from the policy or kind of up a band, and we're piloting this adapted version starting this term. So it's not a massive change, but in some ways it kind of is by these adjustments. And where I want to end is just by sharing a little bit of how this work has changed me. Put it like that. So this really invited me to acknowledge and humbly submit to the limitations of my quantitative training and my own training and the training that I offer others as well. I learned things like positionality. I could read a definition, but this project really required that I engage with that. And it helped guide my decisions of funding sources and who I asked for money, who I didn't, how I collected data, how we analyzed the data. Epistemological challenge, exclamation point. Let's just put it that way. I had to rethink concepts like reality, truth, evidence, validity, reliability, like fundamental things. So this co-occurred, this work of learning qualitative methods, of which I am not claiming to be any expert in, by the way, but it co-occurred with learning more about Indigenous ways of knowing. There's a lot more alignment or more obvious alignment with qualitative methods with many Indigenous ways of knowing. That's not to say there can't be alignment, but there's a stronger fit. Also, profound personal grief, right? I've been in a state of relearning and rethinking a lot in my life. And I have to acknowledge, I'm a tenured professor. And this gave me a privileged safety net to do this work of trying out this completely different framework. It also changed my relationship to teaching quantitative research methods. And some of the folks in this room were, I'm not going to say guinea pigs, but like part of that first cohort of folks who really, I revamped that course. I stripped it down to about 5% of what I had previously. I'd been teaching the course for 15 years. And so among many, many changes that I made, really working to situate, it's still a quantitative course, but situating it as really one way of knowing with strengths and limitations, just like any other, which also enabled me to create some space for Indigenous ways of knowing in the process. I can tell you more about all that if you like. So I think I'll leave things there. Thanks for listening. I don't have more numbers for you. If you would like some, I've got additional slides. But great gratitude to all these folks. And yeah, to everybody and for you for listening. So thank you so much.